At 16, I learned how much my parents thought my room was worth. Every Friday, they expected rent. At 35, my brothers still lived under their roof without paying a cent. When I finally asked Mom why the rules had always been different, she didn't defend herself. She simply said, "You were the responsible one. He needed us more." I had spent 19 years wondering why being responsible had felt like a punishment. That night, I finally understood what it had cost me. My name is Halima Adebayo, a 34-year-old payroll specialist living in Accra. I grew up in a home where every expense was discussed carefully. My parents weren't wealthy, and I understood that from an early age. But there was one rule I never understood. At 16, while I was still in school, my parents told me I needed to contribute toward household expenses. They called it a lesson in responsibility. I started paying a small weekly amount from tutoring younger students and helping at a neighborhood salon after school. My younger brother, Namsa, was treated completely differently. He struggled academically. Then he changed jobs repeatedly. Then he started a business that failed. Then another. Every time life became difficult, my parents gave him another extension. By 35, he was still living at home, still supported, still protected. And I was still carrying a question from childhood. Why had responsibility made me less deserving of help? When I was 16, my mother called me into the kitchen and placed an old brown envelope on the table. I had no idea that envelope would become one of the clearest memories of my childhood. Inside it was the small amount of money I had earned from tutoring younger children and helping after school. I counted the notes twice because I was afraid I had not brought enough. Then I slowly pushed the money toward my mother. She picked it up, smiled, and said, "You should be proud of yourself, Halima. You're learning what adulthood means." I looked at her and nodded, even though I did not fully understand. I was still wearing my school uniform. I still had homework waiting in my room. I was 16, but my parents were already teaching me how to pay for my place in the family. What confused me most was my brother, Namsa. He was older than me, yet nobody asked him to contribute anything. He could stay home, make mistakes, quit jobs, and ask for money whenever he needed it. Nobody called him irresponsible. Nobody told him that adulthood had arrived. But I was different. Every Friday, I was expected to bring my payment. If I earned less one week, I worried about explaining it. I began taking more small jobs because I never wanted to disappoint my parents. At 16, I thought paying rent meant I was becoming responsible. I did not know that years later, I would look back at that first brown envelope and realize I had been carrying a burden that was never supposed to belong to a child. Namsa always seemed to have another chance waiting for him. Whenever he made a mistake, my parents found a reason to forgive him. I noticed it slowly, because when you grow up inside something, you do not always realize how unfair it is. When Namsa failed an important exam, my father did not get angry. He put his hand on his shoulder and said, "He has been under too much pressure. One bad result does not decide his future." I remembered that because when I had once brought home a lower mark, my mother had told me, "You need to work harder. Nobody will always be there to help you." I never forgot the difference. A few years later, Namsa got his first job. He left after only a few months. My mother said his manager did not respect him. My father told him to take some time and think about what he really wanted. Then Namsa started a small business. Everyone celebrated him. My parents helped him with money, encouraged him, and told relatives that their son was building something important. When the business failed, they called it bad luck. I watched my father give him money for another plan. My mother bought things he needed and told him not to worry. I kept wondering why nobody ever told him to handle his own problems. Whenever Namsa needed money, someone found it. When he needed a place to stay, my parents opened their doors. When he needed another chance, they gave him one without asking when the chances would end. But whenever I needed something, the answer was always simple. "You can handle it, Halima." If I was tired, I was told I was strong. If I was worried, I was told I was responsible. If I had a problem, everyone expected me to solve it myself. I never hated Namsa for receiving help. He was my brother, and I loved him. What hurt was the rule I could never explain. I had to prove I could survive. He was allowed to struggle. And nobody seemed to notice that the child they called strong was quietly learning how to live without anyone catching her when she fell. At 22, I finally got my first proper job. I still remember the day I received my first salary. I was proud of myself because I had worked hard to reach that point. For the first time, I thought maybe things at home would finally change. I had been paying my parents since I was 16, and now that I was earning a real salary, I believed they would tell me I had done enough. That evening, I came home with a small smile on my face. I was already thinking about what I could save and what I could finally buy for myself. But before I could even enjoy my first salary, my mother sat me down. She told me that because I was now earning more, my contribution would also increase. I stared at her. Increase? I asked. She nodded as if it was the most normal thing in the world. You have a good job now, Halima. You can afford to help more. I wanted to ask when I would ever be allowed to afford something for myself, but I kept quiet. Then I noticed Namsa had returned home. His latest business had failed, and my parents welcomed him without asking many questions. His bags were placed back in his old room. Nobody talked about how long he would stay. Nobody asked him to pay rent. Nobody told him to find another place. His room slowly became permanent again. His food became part of the household budget. His transport money became another expense. When he needed help finding work, Dad started making calls for him. I watched all of this while knowing that my own monthly payment had just gone up. That was the moment something inside me changed. I stopped expecting fairness to appear on its own. I opened a small savings account and began putting money into it every month. I did not tell my parents how much I saved. I stopped talking about my salary. I stopped explaining every financial decision I made. They thought I was simply becoming better with money. They did not know what I was really saving for. I was not saving for expensive clothes, holidays, or a bigger phone. I was saving for the day when nobody could tell me that my freedom depended on how much I could contribute. For the first time, I was not saving to become more responsible. I was saving to finally have a life that belonged to me. At 27, something happened that I had dreamed about for years. My company offered me a better position in another city. The salary was almost twice what I was earning, and the new job could have changed my whole future. I was excited, but I was also scared. Moving away meant leaving everything familiar behind. I knew I would have to find a new place, make new friends, and start over. Still, deep inside, I knew this was the kind of opportunity people waited years to receive. That evening, I sat with my parents and told them about the offer. For a few seconds, nobody spoke. I looked at my father, expecting him to ask if I was happy. Instead, he frowned. If you leave, who will help us with the household bills? I thought I had heard him wrong. I waited for another question. Maybe he would ask, "Are you sure you want to go?" Maybe Mom would ask if I was afraid of moving alone. But neither happened. My father started calculating what my absence would mean for the family. He talked about groceries, electricity, repairs, and other expenses. My mother quietly agreed with him. Then she said, "You know your brother is still trying to get his life together." I looked at her. Namsa was 30 years old by then. He had already received years of support, but somehow his problems were still being placed beside my future. I did not argue that night. I went to my room and closed the door. I sat on my bed with the job offer still open on my phone. The salary number was right there in front of me, but suddenly I was thinking about something else. For years, I had believed my parents depended on me because I was responsible. Now I understood the truth. They had become comfortable depending on me because I always said yes. Whenever something needed to be paid, I helped. Whenever something went wrong, I found a solution. Whenever Namsa needed another chance, I adjusted my own plans. My independence had slowly become a family resource, and for the first time, I asked myself a painful question. What would happen if I stopped being the person who always stayed? I looked at the job offer again. This time, I did not think about what my family would lose. I thought about what I had spent 27 years giving up. Years passed, and Namsa eventually turned 35. By then, I had stopped expecting my parents to treat us equally. I had learned to keep my feelings to myself and focus on my own life. Still, I was not prepared for what happened on his birthday. My mother decided to organize a huge celebration for him. She invited relatives, family friends, and people who had known Namsa for years. There was food everywhere, music playing, and a large birthday cake with his name written across it. I stood near the back of the room and watched everyone celebrate him. My father stood up first and gave a speech. He talked about Namsa's difficult journey. He said his son had faced many problems but had never given up. Everyone clapped. Then my mother spoke about how proud she was of Namsa. She talked about his failed businesses, his job problems, and all the difficult years he had survived. I listened quietly. There was something strange about hearing them describe his life as a story of perseverance, because I remembered the other side of that story. Every time Namsa failed, my parents gave him another chance. Every time he ran out of money, someone helped him. Every time he wanted to start again, they made space for him. And while everyone praised him for being strong, I remembered how many times I had been expected to be strong without anyone helping me. Then my mother raised her glass and smiled. She announced that they had decided to renovate Namsa's room. He needs a more comfortable space while he figures out his next step, she said. People smiled and clapped again. I nearly laughed. Not because it was funny, because I suddenly realized how long that sentence had been used in our family. Namsa had been figuring out his next step since he was 18. He had changed jobs, started businesses, failed, moved back home, started again. And now he was 35, still living in the same house, still using the same family support, still being given more time. I looked around the room and noticed something else. Nobody was asking when his next step would finally come. Nobody asked when he would start paying his own expenses. Nobody asked whether my parents could keep supporting him forever. Instead, everyone celebrated him. I clapped too, because he was my brother and I did not want to ruin his birthday. But inside, something had shifted. For 17 years, I had wondered why my parents had expected so much from me. That night, watching a 35-year-old man receive praise for simply continuing to need help, I finally understood how different our lives had been. Namsa had been given time to grow. I had been given responsibility and told to grow up. After the last guest left, I stayed behind to help my mother clean the house. Plates were being collected from the table, empty glasses were placed in the kitchen, and the birthday decorations were slowly coming down. My father sat quietly in his chair while Mom folded the tablecloths one by one. I wanted to leave, but I knew that if I walked out again, I might never ask the question that had followed me since I was 16. So I stayed. For years, I had tried to convince myself that the difference between Namsa and me did not matter. I told myself that my parents had their reasons. I told myself that maybe I was simply more mature. Maybe I was stronger. Maybe they believed I could handle more. But that night, I was tired of making excuses for them. I watched my mother fold another tablecloth and finally said, "Mom, can I ask you something?" She looked at me. I took a deep breath. "Why did you charge me rent when I was 16, while I was still in school, but you never asked Namsa for anything?" Her hands stopped moving. The room suddenly felt different. My father looked toward the window instead of looking at me. I waited. Nobody answered. I looked from my mother to my father, hoping one of them would finally say something that made sense. Maybe they would tell me they had needed the money. Maybe they would admit they had made a mistake. Maybe they would say they treated us differently because they were struggling at the time. But my mother finally spoke. "You were always capable," she said quietly. "We knew you would be fine." I stared at her. That was it. No long explanation. No excuse. Just those few words. "You were always capable." I looked down at my hands and remembered the little brown envelope from when I was 16. I remembered counting my money twice. I remembered worrying about being short. I remembered going to school the next morning after working late because I wanted to make sure I could pay. Suddenly, all those old memories felt different. My parents had not asked me to be responsible because they thought I needed to learn. They had asked because they knew I would do it. They trusted me to carry what Namsa was allowed to put down. I swallowed hard. For years, I had wanted an explanation. Now I finally had one. And somehow, the truth hurt more than the question. A few weeks after that conversation with my mother, I went back to my old school. I had not planned to visit for any special reason. I simply found myself wanting to see the place where I had spent so many years trying to become the responsible daughter everyone expected me to be. As I walked through the school gate, one of my former teachers saw me and immediately recognized me. "Halima," she asked with a smile. "Is that really you?" I smiled and hugged her. We sat together and started talking about my school days. At first, I remembered the good things. My friends, my classes, the teachers who helped me, and the small dreams I had when I was young. Then she reminded me of things I had almost forgotten. She remembered that I used to stay after school to tutor younger students because I needed extra money. She remembered seeing me sitting alone after class, counting the money I had earned. She remembered how often I looked tired. Then she told me that there were days when I would fall asleep during afternoon lessons. I felt embarrassed hearing it. "I don't remember being that tired," I said. She looked at me for a moment. "You were," she replied. "You were carrying a lot for a young girl." I became quiet. She also remembered how worried I used to be about money at home. Sometimes I had asked questions about bills, food, and whether my parents needed help. At the time, I thought those things were normal. I thought every responsible child did the same. Then my teacher said something that stayed with me. "Halima, you were never supposed to carry all of that." I looked down at the floor. That sentence made me remember the brown envelope from when I was 16. It made me remember the rent, the work, the tired mornings, and all the times I had been told I was strong. For years, I had been proud of being strong. But on my way home, I started asking myself a different question. Was I really strong? Or had I simply been given no choice? There was a difference between becoming responsible because someone teaches you, and becoming responsible because nobody comes to help you. For the first time, I understood that my childhood had not been as normal as I thought. I had not simply grown up early. I had been forced to. After my visit to the school, something inside me changed. I did not suddenly hate my parents, and I did not blame Namsa for everything that had happened. I simply became tired of living as if my money was something the whole family could automatically depend on. So I made a decision. I was going to change the way I helped my family. I did not announce it at dinner. I did not threaten anyone. I did not tell my parents that they had been unfair for years. I simply started saying no. The first time my mother asked me to pay an extra household bill, I looked at her and said, "I can't pay that this month." She stared at me. "You always help," she said. "I know," I replied. "But I need to take care of my own expenses too." She did not argue, but I could see that she was surprised. A few days later, Namsa called me because he was short of money again. He needed help paying for something and expected me to send it like I had done many times before. I almost opened my banking app. Then I stopped. "I'm sorry, Namsa," I told him. "I can't cover it this time." There was silence on the phone. "But you have a job," he said. "So do you," I answered quietly. It was the first time I had ever said those words to him. After that, things became uncomfortable. My parents had to look at their monthly expenses more carefully. They could no longer assume that my salary would fill every gap. They started discussing which bills were necessary and which ones could wait. At first, Mom complained that I had changed. Maybe I had, but I was not becoming selfish. I was finally becoming fair to myself. For years, saying yes had been easier than explaining why I could not help. My family had become used to my quick answers, my payments, and my quiet support. Now they had to make their own plans. One evening, Dad called me and asked if I could still help with a large expense. I said no. He became quiet and then asked, "Are you angry with us?" I thought about it before answering. "I was angry for a long time," I said. "But this isn't about punishment. I just can't keep carrying things that aren't mine." That conversation opened the door to many others. My parents finally started talking about money, responsibility, and the different expectations they had placed on me and Namsa. The conversations were uncomfortable, but for the first time, they were honest. And I realized that sometimes setting a boundary does not destroy a family. Sometimes it forces a family to finally face the truth. I expected Namsa to become angry when I stopped helping him, but something happened that I never saw coming. He did not collapse. He did not stop trying. At first, things were difficult for him. He had to look for work without expecting Mom or Dad to solve the problem. He found a small part-time job and started earning enough to cover some of his own expenses. It was not a perfect job, and the money was not much, but it was his. For the first time, Namsa had to think about what he could afford instead of simply asking someone else to pay. A few months later, he found another opportunity. It was not his dream job, but it gave him regular income. He started helping with groceries and some household bills. My parents noticed the change too. Nobody insulted him. Nobody called him lazy. Nobody reminded him of all the years he had depended on them. They simply stopped rescuing him. And slowly, Namsa began doing things for himself. One evening, my phone rang. It was Namsa. I almost expected him to ask for money. Instead, he asked, "Can we talk?" I sat down. He was quiet for a few seconds before saying, "I have been thinking about you." I did not know what to say. Then he continued. I used to think you were lucky because you were independent. I stayed silent. I thought you had everything under control because you were just better at life than me. His voice became softer. But I understand now. I waited. He said, everyone kept making room for me. Every time I failed, someone made space for me to try again. Every time I needed money, someone found it. Every time I came home, there was always a place for me. He paused. While you kept making room for yourself. Those words stayed with me. For years, I had wondered if Namsa even noticed the difference between our lives. Now I knew he had finally seen it. I told him I was not angry with him. He said, I know. But I am sorry I never noticed before. That conversation changed something between us. We were no longer fighting over who received more. We were no longer silently comparing our lives. Namsa was finally learning to stand on his own, and I was finally learning that I did not have to carry everyone. For the first time, we were simply brother and sister. No competition. No old roles. Just two adults finally seeing the truth about how differently we had been raised. Years later, my parents decided to move into a smaller home. They no longer needed such a large place, and by then, Namsa had finally moved out and rented an apartment of his own. For the first time, he was paying his own bills, buying his own food, and managing his own life. I went to help my parents with the move. While we were clearing an old drawer, my mother suddenly stopped. She reached inside and pulled out a small, faded brown envelope. She looked at it for a moment before handing it to me. I knew it immediately. It was one of the envelopes I had used when I was 16. My name was written across the front in my mother's handwriting. Halima, Week 3. I held it carefully and stared at those words. For a moment, I was 16 again. I could see myself standing beside the kitchen table, counting the little money I had earned after school. I remembered how proud I had felt when my mother told me I was learning responsibility. But now I understood that I had been learning something else too. I had been learning that I could not depend on anyone. My mother sat beside me. Then she quietly said, I wish we had understood something back then. I looked at her. She continued, teaching responsibility doesn't mean making one child carry what another child avoids. I did not know what to say. For years, I had imagined what it would feel like if my parents finally admitted they had treated us differently. Now that moment had come. And strangely, I did not feel angry. I did not want the old rent money returned. I did not want my mother to somehow erase those years. I did not even need a perfect apology. I only wanted the truth to be spoken. I wanted someone to finally admit that being the responsible child should never have meant being treated like an adult before I was ready. I folded the old envelope and placed it in my bag. It was just a small piece of paper, but it carried a part of my childhood that I had spent years trying to understand. That envelope had never really been about money. It was proof of how early I had learned to earn my place. And as I walked out of my parents' old home, I finally understood something I wished I had known at 16. I never had to earn my place in my own family. It should have been mine from the beginning. Some children are praised for being strong so often that nobody notices when strength becomes exhaustion. Being responsible should never mean receiving less love. And being protected should never mean being denied the chance to grow. The fairest families aren't the ones that give everyone exactly the same thing. They're the ones that make sure nobody is quietly carrying more than their share. If your parents had treated you like an adult while protecting your sibling like a child, would you confront them or simply change the way you supported the family? Tell us what you would do in the comments, and subscribe for more emotional family stories with unexpected turns and powerful endings.